Someday, I'll be falling without caution, but for now, I'm only people watching. By Katakoo. Read by Rat Overlord. Chapter 2. That conversation with Todoroki had convinced Izuku that his sexuality, or lack thereof, needed to be dealt with as soon as possible. Pretending that nothing was wrong with him just wasn't an option anymore, and he had questions that were screaming for answers, for knowledge, questions about what he was and why he was like this. Only one thing was certain: he wasn't like his friends. He didn't feel the same things as them. For the next couple weeks, Izuku had several evenings and sleepless nights where he stayed awake on his laptop, researching. The amount of time he had to do this was limited. He had responsibilities as both a heroic student and as a quote-unquote boyfriend that made it impossible to get all his answers in one sitting like he usually did with his research marathons. Almost every session ended with even more questions than he had at the start, more aspects to explore, and more stuff to check out. He learned so many things. Apparently, there were other people who shared his experiences. There were whole communities of them online, some with hundreds of members eager to talk to him. Their umbrella included dozens of sub-identities with specific and fascinating definitions, a whole range of emotions about being attracted, or not, to different kinds of people. He read articles and watched videos about and by members of this new community that he found himself in. Surprisingly, even for a relatively small identity compared to some others in the LGBTQIA+ community, there were a lot of creators willing to share the story of how they figured it all out. And boy, were they helpful for someone who is just starting that same journey. He took quizzes, so many quizzes. He answered the same questions over and over and over again. Some quizzes were helpful, and some were total garbage, but he never knew for certain which ones were which. They gave him several different answers, assigned different identities to him, but one of them clearly rose to the top. He was aromantic and asexual. Aroace for short. He didn't feel any romantic or sexual attraction to anyone, even though he'd always known in the back of his mind that love and relationships just weren't for him, that they would never be, simply because of the profession he was going into. Even though the signs were all there, that final blow of that having a label just hit hard. So hard that when he finally figured it out, everything stopped. He had to shut his laptop and sit on his bed silently as tears beaded at the corners of his eyes. Because even if he knew that he lacked a certain feeling that others had, it was difficult to come to terms with not getting to feel it. Ever. He was never going to meet someone he wanted to kiss, experience that floaty, bubbly feeling of first love, settle down and get married to a nice girl or boy or anyone, really. He'd never walk by the beach, hand in hand with someone, and lower his head into the crook of their neck. He'd never get to experience the feeling of adoration that came with the love of his life walking into a room. He would never have that traditional life with Ochako. 2 children, a dog, and a house behind a picket fence. No matter how hard he tried, he would never be normal. And it hurt. It hurt more than he ever could have imagined. Izuku grunted as his fist connected with the punching bag. His knuckles ached. They were already leaving bloody marks on the punching bag, despite not being long after he'd gotten to the gym. Or was it? He couldn't tell. He could feel the deafening music buzzing in the floor under his feet in a pathetic attempt to drown out every other noise in his mind. He was lost in a frantic swirl of feelings as he punched the bag again and again and again. He'd been doing this a lot lately, sneaking out of his dorm after curfew to go to the gym. Either he couldn't sleep, or he just had too many emotions. Either way, he needed to release some energy, do something before he went insane. Besides, at night, there was no one to see him breaking down in the free weight section. He didn't always know the exact reason why his emotions became unbearable in the evening, why he felt the need to punch his feelings out. His brain had just been going haywire, and sweating it out was the most foolproof way to make it stop. Training until he couldn't breathe or stand as his vision was going dark near the edges, warning of an impending darkness, was the perfect way to distract himself from the overwhelming emotions swirling in his chest. He could drown out his thoughts, ignore anything and everything that was weighing in the back of his mind. He was just so angry, filled to the brim with that red-hot emotion. Angry at himself, his friends, Ochako, and the world, really. With some help, he could probably reach the root cause of that. But all by himself, it was a daunting task. All he knew was that he wanted to punch a wall when something went even slightly wrong, or for absolutely no reason at all, and nothing else ever seemed to satisfy that need. Izuku flinched violently when the punching bag suddenly banged against the gym's roof, pulling him out of his thoughts. He looked down at his arms to see the telltale green sparks of One For All still dancing across his body. He must have accidentally activated his quirk this time. He looked up to where the bag had made contact with the ceiling to make sure that it hadn't made much damage. Thankfully, only a bit of paint had chipped off. He sighed in relief at the fact that he wouldn't get in trouble for wrecking the gym. Only, he noticed something. That had felt good. He threw another experimental punch with One For All at 2% and sent the bag arching towards the ceiling and thumping against it, then stopped it when it swung back towards him. Oh, this was even better than just mauling the punching bag quirkless. Seeing the punching bag slam against the ceiling made something in Izuku stir. Emboldened by the hot feeling in his gut, he punched again, and again, and again and again until all he could think about was the euphoric pain in his knuckles and the thwap of his fist against the rough leather. Why? He screamed in his mind as another hit rattled the bones in his arms. Why? He kneed the punching bag with all his might, sending it sprawling to one side. Why can't I just love like everyone else? A delightful flash of pain grazed his knee after it had scraped the seam of the bag. Why am I broken? Large hands gripped his biceps painfully, a familiar weighted stare cutting off his quirk. He desperately attempted to move his arms in spite of the strong hands holding him down, chasing the high of another hit, another sting in his hands. A frustrated grunt escaped his throat as he bucked in the vice grip he was being held in.
Midoriya! Midoriya! Midoriya!
Through his heavy breaths, he could make out someone shouting his name. As his vision cleared and the black spots faded, he saw his homeroom teacher leaning over him, his eyes blown wide open and his long hair floating in the air. Some time earlier, the music had been shut off, leaving only his heavy pants.
Good, you're alive,
Mr. Aizawa said once his breaths had evened out.
Now, care to tell me why I got woken up by an alarm saying someone was wrecking this gym?
He asked in a flat, unimpressed tone. Izuku blinked and looked around, sitting up from the restrained position laying on the floor, noticing that in the time he'd been lost in his rage, he had, in fact, been wrecking the gym. He must have used more of his quirk than he'd intended, judging by the roof panel that was currently lying broken on the floor behind the punching bag, leaving the leg press crushed beneath it. Oops! Izuku grimaced.
Sorry, sir. I needed to blow off some steam, and I got carried away, I guess. You needed to blow off some steam by sneaking out of your room after hours? As I said, I'm sorry.
He hissed through his teeth.
You don't sound sorry. Well, too fucking bad then. Language.
For a few beats, Izuku and his teacher held eye contact. One stared defiant, the other blank. Mr. Aizawa gave in first, sighing tiredly.
Alright, what's wrong, Midoriya?
Mr. Aizawa sat down on a workbench, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees.
You're not Bakugo. I know you wouldn't do something like this for no reason. Nothing's wrong. I'm fine. You're very clearly not.
He sat in silence, as if thinking of something troubling.
Is it the same thing that's been bugging you during training lately? I've noticed your increased aggression, you know.
Izuku fidgeted with his hands, playing with the hair tie he always kept on his wrist in case Ochako needed one. His gaze was kept firmly on the large exercise mat that covered the whole floor.
Maybe.
Out of the corner of his eye, he saw his teacher nodding slowly.
Look, I'm not going to bug you or force you to talk about this with me. I've got better uses of my time than questioning you about something you don't want to tell me. Just promise me you're going to tell someone, all right? It could be me. My office is always open if you want to talk. Or one of your friends, family, or another teacher. I don't care who, just someone. Don't deal with this alone. Okay. I promise, sir.
Mr. Aizawa got up, then started to walk back to the gym's entrance. When he was nearly there, he looked back at Izuku impatiently and said,
Get up. I'm escorting you back to your room.
Izuku swiftly sprung to his feet, grabbed the phone he had brought with him, thankfully it didn't get caught up in the wreckage, and ran to catch up with Mr. Aizawa, who held open the door for him. The cool night air already started calming down his mind, and the walk back to 1A's dorm building was spent in silence. At the foot of the stairs leading up to the students' dorm, Mr. Aizawa cleared his throat, signaling him to stay for a moment.
Don't think that I'm excusing your rule violation, Midoriya. Your actions have consequences, even if you were in an emotional state while taking them. After classes tomorrow, you're cleaning the common room until it is deemed spotless, and during hero basic training, you're doing quirk control drills with me instead of the planned kidnapping scenario with the rest of the class to ensure that this doesn't happen again. I will also be sending a bill for the property damage you've caused to your mother.
He exhaled wearily, something he'd been doing a lot tonight.
I'm not angry with you, and my offer to talk still stands if you want it, problem child. Good night. Good night, sir.
He felt Mr. Aizawa's eyes following him up the stairs until he turned the corner out of their sight. He headed for his room without stopping or looking back, practically sprinting to the dorm, but as soon as he closed the door behind him, he let out a huge puff of air. He flopped onto his bed, attempting to calm down the rapid, nervous heartbeat still left over from the gym. Suddenly, his gaze caught on the picture of him and Ochako on their first date. her giving him a one-armed hug and a kiss on the cheek. Meanwhile, his mouth was curved into a fake smile anyone who really knew him could have caught from a mile away. He quickly looked away from the photo. Mr. Aizawa was right. He needed to talk about this with someone. Izuku was not the best at keeping secrets. He hadn't been able to keep his mouth shut about one frau for long before telling Kachan about it. Sure, he hadn't told anyone else, but he was aching to talk it out with someone, just to hear himself say it out loud. Any time he had to keep something to himself, the knowledge buzzed inside his brain like a beehive after being poked, the slightest thing being able to set it off to explode at the worst possible moment. And the only thing he could do to calm it down was letting the information go in a controlled manner to someone he trusted. And yes, that was the only thing that he could do. He tried so many different methods over the years, writing it down in a notebook or speaking it out loud to his figurines or muttering it unintelligibly in a full classroom, or even trying to take his mind off it by focusing on another activity. It worked to calm down his mind for about a day or two. After that, the buzzing and murmuring would come back with vengeance, threatening to spill out of him like word vomit to anyone who would listen, or any poor soul that just so happened to be near him at the wrong time. Well, in reality, sometimes the poor soul would turn out to be him if that unwilling listener was one of his old classmates. Point being, this aroace thing had been left to grow within his mind for several weeks now. He was just about ready to burst and have it all blow up in his face. Honestly, he was surprised he hadn't managed to spill the beans to anyone yet, even if he'd been really, really tempted to. The words weighed on the tip of his tongue, writhing in his gut whenever he was alone with anyone, really. Be it cuddling with Ochako, wouldn't that have been a disaster? Hanging out with Todoroki or any of his other friends, having a private lunch with All Might, or just a random lull in hero basic training when he stood off to the side silently with, say, Ashido or Seito. He needed to tell someone. During his evening workout, which wasn't one of his midnight sessions this time, thank you very much, was one of the many times when he'd seriously thought about coming out to someone. Who would be most likely to respond positively? What scenario would cause the least unpleasant consequences in the event that it didn't go well? Who would need the least explaining and educating and convincing? When to catch that person in a good mood, with the least possible amount of school assignments due? When they would actually have the time and energy to properly listen to him? There were a lot of things to consider, mull over, analyze, and optimize. Finally, he figured it out. There was a time, place, and person that would fill all of his criteria. He was finally going to tell someone, make this fucking torture stop, and move on with his life. Share this weight on his shoulders with another person to let himself focus on solving the problem that actually mattered. How to handle Ochako and the mess he'd gotten himself into. He had a plan. It would be Todoroki at one of their late-night hangouts and as close to 3 a.m. as he could get. All right, this was it. He could feel it in his very damaged bones. This was the night he was going to tell Todoroki. Training had gone very well that day, and his friend had made a breakthrough with his quirk. He'd figured out how to cause small explosions with a buildup of cold and heat, and Kachan hadn't been very happy about someone else in their class able to mimic him. Todoroki had taken the opportunity to rub his new discovery in Kachan's face. Also, a new gif of Endeavor tripping on something on the street and falling on his face had gone viral. Every once in a while, Izuku could see a small, diabolical smirk make its way onto Todoroki's face while he was on his phone, supposedly from seeing all the memes people had made about it. After curfew, at midnight, Izuku quietly closed his bedroom door behind him and tiptoed his way to the common room. He took out the cold soba he'd hidden in the back of the common room fridge and headed back up the stairs to his friend's room. A knock later, he stepped onto the familiar tatami flooring to find an extra futon already laid out, as per usual. He typically ended up passing out at around 4 no matter whose room he was in anyways. Might as well have a futon ready. They'd learned that the hard way one night when Izuku had fallen asleep mid-sentence on Todoroki's floor.
Midoriya, oh, soba.
Todoroki whispered in awe instead of a greeting. As he snatched the Tupperware right out of Izuku's hands. Izuku let out an amused huff. They sat down, cross-legged on the floor, Todoroki already beginning to slurp his noodles greedily.
Alright, so...
Izuku started while fidgeting with his hands.
I need to tell you something. I'm pretty sure you already know what I'm about to say, but... I need to say it anyways.
He had told him about his feelings, or lack thereof, that one night, so it might have been pretty obvious.
Oh.
Todoroki said slowly, with a look of mild surprise and a mouth half full of soba.
I think I know, and I might have something to tell you too. Right. So I've been doing a lot of research, and I've already known this for a while, about 3 weeks, maybe. But I wasn't sure how you'd react, so I just kept putting it off. I kept waiting around for, I don't know, the stars to align or something. I know that sounds pretty stupid, but it was just... I wanted to find the right moment. And I think this is the right moment. Maybe? Or I might be making a huge mistake and you'll never talk to me again. Oh god, I hope you'll still talk to me even after this. I mean, you probably will. You don't strike me as the type of guy to stop being friends with someone over something like this, but you know how I get, and...
Izuku suddenly caught himself going in a direction he didn't particularly want to go in, and, with great effort and a deep breath, reined his racing thoughts back in.
I'm rambling again, aren't I? I'm sorry, I'm just... nervous. No, I understand. If you're about to say what I think you're about to say, I'd be nervous as well. And I'm actually nervous, that is.
Todoroki put down the Tupperware, focusing all of his attention on Izuku.
Why don't we both say our things at the same time? It might get rid of a part of the anxiety surrounding all this.
Izuku thought about his proposition for a second. Of course, it was a bit weird, and if Todoroki guessed what he was about to tell him, Izuku had a hard time figuring out what he might have to say that connected to his asexuality and all. Either way, he decided to agree.
Sure. Yeah, you're probably right. So, on 3? On 3.
He confirmed.
1, 2, 3. I'm in love with you. Aromantic and asexual. Wait, what?
Izuku whipped his head up to send an incredulous look towards Todoroki, whose face was getting exponentially redder by the second.
He
He seemed at a loss for words, completely taken aback by Izuku coming out. Congratulations? He said it slowly, unsurely, like he was stepping on thin ice, afraid to put his whole weight on it. Then he seemed to snap back into reality, clearing his throat and continuing to speak, though it came out mechanic, his face and tone completely blank. I'm happy that you found an identity that fits you, and I'm sorry for revealing my feelings to you like this.
No, wait, I'm sorry!
Izuku yelled, waving his hands in front of his face.
I had no idea, really,
Todoroki cut him off.
No need to apologize. Your sexuality is something you can't control. You trusted me with it, and I completely ruined the moment by confessing to you. This is totally my fault.
Your feelings aren't under your control either. I'm just sorry. This is just so unexpected. And really, if I liked men, I would totally date you. You're like a snack.
Izuku reassures awkwardly.
Like, super good looking. Any guy you want is going to fall head over heels for you. You're like my male Uraraka. Oh my god, why am I like this?
Izuku buried his head in his hands for a moment before dragging them across his face and continuing.
What I meant was she's the one that I'd fall for if I liked girls, and you're... Oh, you know what? I'm just gonna go back to my room. How about that?
Izuku jumped to his feet, practically tripping over himself as he stumbled out of Todoroki's room without looking back. He probably slammed the door way too loud for how late it was, certainly loud enough for Todoroki's neighbors to hear it, and raced back to his own dorm room. Howdy, fellow rats. Hope you enjoyed. Considering that I recently realized that I'm Demi, I feel like this was a rather topical fic for me. I really love hearing from all of y'all in the comments about your own experiences with being ace, arrow, or aroace. There really isn't enough representation in media, which is why I was so excited to podfic this fic, and it seems like y'all felt the same way, so that's pretty great. Pretty cool. Anyways, feel free to leave a like or comment down below, because I always love hearing from you guys, and make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date with whenever I post. And with that said, go treat some water fountains like keg stands and chug some water, people. And continuing this theme of this fic, you're not broken if you love people in a way that is different from what society deemed to be normal. If anyone tells you how you were created to love people is wrong, then they're the ones that really need a reality check, because that's not how it works. You were born that way. It just makes what's normal for you different from what's normal for someone else. But that's not a bad thing. You're not broken, you're just different from the majority. It's like telling someone that they're wrong for being born with blue eyes or brown eyes. It's just illogical. It's not something you can change or choose, it's just who you are. And you deserve to be treated with respect regardless of how you identify. And with that said, adios, fellow rats.